Okay, so we've started our recording. Welcome back to those of you that have joined any of our sessions this morning, and a huge welcome if this is your first session. This session is all about setting out Scotland's roadmap to recovery and recycling our way to a more sustainable future. Local government and its partners have a critical role to play in building a sustainable recovery following the COVID-19 pandemic. And Ian Gulland, Chief Exec of Zeroway Scotland, will explain how his organisation is supporting and working with us to implement the changes that will help in building that sustainable recovery. Wee bit of background about Ian. Ian Gulland is Zeroway Scotland's founding Chief Executive and was the Programme Director of the predecessor programme WRAP, which was Waste and Resources Action Programme. He has massive amount of experience in working with initiating recycling systems in the public, private and third sectors. And Ian was also named the most influential person in the UK waste resource efficiency sector by Resource magazine in 2014. And the final thing to say about Ian, when he and I met, and it must have been a couple of years ago, he introduced me to the innovative idea of actually leasing your jeans, which I've thought about and raised like many times since, Ian. So thank you for that. And with that, I'll hand over to you, Ian, okay?
Okay, thank you, Julie. Indeed, I have my leased jeans on at the moment, so there you go. I could probably talk about them for a while. So, and that's very much about the circular economy. So thank you for the opportunity and to talk to you today. So my kind of purpose is to say a few things about the circular economy, just as a kind of oversight, and then give you some thoughts on how you can all help us all with the transition to the circular economy, and then hopefully have a chat and answer some questions at the end. So I'll just kick off. Zeroway Scotland, we are Scotland's circular economy experts. We believe in a world without waste, and I'm sure others will be well aware that it is our wastefulness in terms of our attitude to resources which is causing huge ecological, economic and social damage around the planet. The current model that we are involved in is very linear. We extract resources from the ground, we make something with them, we use it, often we use it just once, and then we throw it away. And this model is actually, this in terms of resource extraction, this accounts for over 50% of the climate emissions globally. It also accounts for 90% of biodiversity loss and water stress globally as well. So it's not just a climate emergency, it's a nature emergency too. Now, I'm sure everybody understands the impact of climate change, what it's having around the world. You can't turn on your television these days without a new documentary, I guess, showing how various things are changing in terms of the weather patterns and the impact that that's having, not just in other parts of the world, but here in Scotland too. I was actually just reading this morning in terms of a gardener. I'm quite a keen gardener, that warmer summers will cause vegetables such as lettuces, cabbages, and spinach to bolt and flower much more easily. So it's going to make it even more difficult for me as a gardener to get my vegetables in time before they all bolt, which seems to be the normal course of events in my garden. So it's going to even happen more easily. So we've obviously set some ambitious targets here in Scotland around climate change and put in plans through government strategies and organisational strategies to address this. We're all aiming for net zero by 2045. And I know there's probably been huge amounts of discussions within your own teams, in your day job, about how public spending can be used to accelerate the work in this area. So I'm going to share some thoughts on my own on this. And again, as I said, ask for your ideas on how we can all work either collectively as in terms of the procurement family, or individually with your own public body or council, who, if perhaps you want to pilot something or try something new with us at Zeroway Scotland. So we do talk quite a lot about decarbonisation of our electricity grid when we talk about climate change here in Scotland. So electric vehicles, low carbon heating systems are usually the kind of top list of actions we tend to focus on, and all of that is hugely important. Of course, we need to be doing that, but 4/5 of Scotland's global carbon footprint is actually down to products and services that we make, consume, and, as I've said, too often waste. And about half of these emissions are produced overseas in the things that we import, everyday items from other countries all around the world. Some of those countries are actually, typically poorer and possibly more polluting than Scotland. So the impact on biodiversity is much greater. So if we're serious here in Scotland about ending our contribution to climate change, then we need to look beyond our own emissions and consider the impact of our own lifestyle, our economy is having in other parts of the world. So one of the approaches that we can all take to help this is to adopt a more circular economy, where we reuse more of our resources again and again. This isn't just about recycling, but about designing products and services in a way that incentivizes greater reuse, repair and refurbishment. And a great enabler for this is how we actually buy things, or how do we procure things. So the circular economy will help us to reduce the need reduce the need for many new products and materials, cutting down on emissions both here in Scotland and abroad, but will also reduce waste at the same time. So it's not only good for the environment, it's good for jobs. The circular economy is excellent for jobs, and it's good for productivity in our businesses. It's good for competitiveness in our businesses here in Scotland, and very important when we start to think about resilience as well, which I think we're all beginning to be much more aware of after the pandemic. In fact, before the coronavirus impacted on the economy, research that we carried out in terms of the importance of the circular economy estimated that adopting more circular approaches or principles would benefit the economy by £3 billion annually. Now that's we believe still a very conservative estimate. Further work that we've been carrying out during the pandemic would suggest that it's much higher now. There's also a potential to grow a kind of new remanufacturing industry approach here in Scotland, which would support over 5,500 new jobs. It's not only that, in terms of our communities, they would benefit from some of those forward-looking jobs, which are less susceptible to market pressures. Circular supply chains are much more resilient to future shocks, and jobs more secure as a result. So for individual businesses here in Scotland, embedding circular economy principles can open up new business opportunities, boost brand reputation, and sometimes even benefit the bottom line. And more of the businesses that we're working with are demonstrating that indeed they are, their bottom line is benefiting. Consumer trends are obviously driving a lot of this. People are not just interested in how much energy a product uses, but they're actually beginning to ask questions about the supply chains, like where are the materials coming from? What is the impact of the manufacturing process involved in this, particularly around things like fashion. Fast fashion is a big issue with consumers now, and people beginning to ask questions about where their materials are coming from. So embracing the circular economy is clearly good for not just the macro economy, but the micro economy as well. We're recognised in Scotland to be quite a leader in this. It's been core of Scottish Government policy for some time now. The Scottish Government released a national strategy in 2016, and it's the role of the circular economy is well recognised in other documents that have come out since, including the climate change plan just before Christmas. So as I said, we're working with a number of companies, over 200 individual companies, to adopt more circular business models. There's a lot of innovation going on from companies who use things like waste coffee grounds, turn them into new valuable oils for cosmetics, reusable packaging models to be alternative to single use, and even pioneering leasing models for products and services. A company called Egg Lighting, which doesn't sell lighting fittings anymore, but offers a kind of lease and hire model to ensure that they can refurbish and remanufacture very valuable equipment and metals involved in the light production system. We're working with a lot of local authorities and other public agencies as well on looking at circular strategies both within their communities to support the further rollout of this. But one of the biggest challenges to achieving a circular economy is clearly a change in mindset. It means changing the way we've lived and worked for quite some time. What's more, the change is needed at every level, from ourselves as individuals, but also working with our communities, whether that's at work, at play, or socially as well. Involves manufacturers, designers, decision makers. We all have a role to play, and as I've said, including the way that we procure. So this is where you come in. I mean, clearly, as procurers, you have the ability, to create the market pool for a lot of those new business models that we've been working with. So whether these companies are into refurbishment or reuse, or as I've said, rental models such as egg lighting or reusable packaging companies, thinking about what it is that we are buying, thinking about performance rather than ownership. Thinking about what that supply chain would look like, both from a national point of view and even from a local point of view, could really help shape those, the attraction or the further development or the scaling up of those business models. And those companies are now, they've done the kind of feasibility work. They know their business model will stack up. They're just now really looking for the market pool to be there so they can really, take themselves forward. And we see this, in other parts of the world. I mean, always a good example is NASA, National Space Agency in America. They don't own any spacecraft anymore, believe it or not. They actually hire or they lease Earth orbital services, believe it or not. And this whole approach increases innovation, it integrates the supply chain better, it clearly allows for a higher quality jobs in terms of remanufacturing and repurposing of equipment, as things are actually interchangeable and repurposed on an ongoing basis rather than just disposed of. So these are real opportunities that we could create here in Scotland if we could just start to think differently about how we procure, and we might, as an organisation, we're keen to help pilot some of those ideas to try and explore what they would look like in practice, or and particularly with some of the companies we're working with. I mean, an example that we've just recently been working on is with the NHS on refillable hand sanitizer bottles, as this was noted as a critical pinch point during the pandemic. Getting hand sanitizer bottles recycled was very much a challenge. So thinking about the refillability of that to cut down the supply chain and build a bit of resilience into the system is now being looked at seriously, and that's a Scottish company that we're working with. The circular economy is not just, what's really changing is the circular economy is not just seen as something interesting to do with waste anymore. I think that was possibly the entry point for a lot of people. It's very much seen about how can we use current resources within perhaps our waste stream or within our economy, and how can we repurpose and refurbish them back into our economy in terms of materials and products. And another role where particularly local authorities come into focus here is you have access to materials, through the recycling services that you run. So you have the opportunity to provide those materials, or certainly shape the provision of those materials back into our economy to create further economic and social impact. And that is really, really a huge opportunity for us, whereas the value of the materials themselves isn't that significant. So yes, we can trade the materials on the kind of global supply chain, but we might get a few extra pounds per tonne for our paper or for our cardboard or for our plastic bottles, and increase certainly a degree of income to the individual local authorities. But actually, if we could aggregate those materials and provide them into reprocessing or refurbishment opportunities here in Scotland, the opportunities are 10-15-fold in terms of economic benefit for Scotland. Previous work that we've done is for every one job there is in the collection of materials for recycling, there's a further 8 jobs in the reprocessing, remanufacturing, resupply of those materials. So yes, we're collecting much more materials here in Scotland, and that's all very good. It's keeping out of landfill and protecting the environment, but over 70% of the materials we collect for recycling are actually exported out of our country to other parts of the UK or further afield into mainland Europe and beyond. So actually we're exporting jobs. And some of that is down to a very fragmented system where we have 32 local authorities, a number of other public agencies all doing various different things. So we have a great opportunity, particularly at the moment where the Scottish Government have providing over £70 million of investment over the next 5 years in recycling services to local authorities. We could be using that £70 million to lever another public and private investment to, if we could think differently about what are the opportunities here for materials to be captured from our recycling systems here in Scotland, but turned into, as I said, jobs here in Scotland in terms of reprocessing and putting them back in to the economy. And there's lots of examples on particularly around plastics, and even if we think about the onshoring of PPE, or the manufacturing of PPE equipment, which obviously is again coming out of the pandemic in terms of building resilience, there's huge opportunity to actually provide plastic, from our waste stream into that process, both to build the supply chains, but obviously from an environmental point of view, very significantly. So we are here to help as an agency. We've got a number of opportunities and toolkits that we can help support. We're already working with a number of the public agencies, as I've said. We have developed a specific tool called the carbon metric, which can provide analysis of the whole life cycle costing of waste management strategies, which will demonstrate how important reuse and repair and remanufacturing is, rather than just buying and getting rid of. We are working with other EU partners on a programme of work called ProCirc, which is identifying further toolkits that could be provided to procurement professionals across Europe, and also just identifying, what are some of the barriers and how could we overcome them together in a much more collaborative way. So as Julie pointed out, yeah, absolutely, we are focused on the green recovery, but for us, it's all about recovering our economy in a way that respects the limits of our natural environment, and doing so will help us generate a much fairer, more sustainable and more resilient economy. So I will leave it there, but I'm very much looking forward to answering some questions or having a discussion about some of the things I've said.
Thanks, Ian. I've got a wee bit of an echo. I think it's fading now, that's fine. We already have one question, and it's quite an extensive question from Veronica Formosa Hamilton. I'll read it out for you, Ian, to give you a chance to gather your thoughts. So, how will extended producer responsibility for packaging from 2023 aid public bodies in the future with packaging from goods purchased by the public pound? There is a second part to the question, but I'll let you cover that one first.
Okay, well, that's a good question on both sides. So on one level, the producer responsibility will increase the kind of recyclability of packaging. It will increase the amount of material that is collected for reprocessing back into new packaging. So if you're going to be buying packaging into the future, the ambition will be that packaging will be less carbon intensive. It will be it'll have recycled materials in it or recycled content in it. But more importantly, the process for it to be captured again, actually recycled or collected, will be much more within one scheme. So the producers will have much more ownership of that scheme, and therefore there is an opportunity for it to be funded differently. So that's what I'll say. So looking at it from if you're buying packaging, the packaging will be better in terms of the environment, but actually the recycling services will hopefully be, the intention is that it will be more directly funded by the producers. So therefore there'll be much more increased investment in the recycling system. So hopefully, the plan is that the public sector, who basically funds most of the recycling, not just here in Scotland, but across the UK when it comes to packaging, it'll be funded by the producers.
Yeah. Okay, and following on from that, how do you think the Zeroway Scotland carbon metric can be used by public procurement specialists to embed climate change evaluation into the core requirement of goods and services purchases?
Okay, this is where I wish I had one of my technical analysis to help you. I mean, to be fair, the tool is available, and I've got colleagues that can help individual councillors, and I know we are already looking at it, and it is about it will help people it's kind of, it's the evidence base. A lot of the time you're asked, well, hold on a minute, is this going to cost more money? What is the carbon benefits of this? Everybody says it's going to be more beneficial for it, but how can I demonstrate that to my bosses or to my councillors or whoever it is that this is the best thing to do? The metric does that. The metric will start to provide the information that shows if we adopt a different model, even from recycling, adopt a reuse or repair model or a refurbishment model, or even just reduce waste completely, it starts to demonstrate the carbon impacts of that. And that's what it's really about. I mean, it's obviously been used at a macro level by the Scottish Government as a policy tool to explore, new strategies around waste management in the round. But it can be used at a local level, and it can be used at a even within an individual authority, just to demonstrate what the real impact is of different procurement strategy or different strategies for utilisation of materials and products, and that's what it's designed for. Because I think we all just think about what is the final options we have around disposal of our waste, but actually it's about the upfront impact of that as well, and that's what the carbon metric does. It's basically the whole life cycle costing of the products and materials.
Are there any plans to extend the carbon metric to a wider range of goods and services, Ian?
We'd love to do that. I mean, we've spent a number of years embedding the carbon metric as it is in terms of waste materials. That kind of level, as I've said, a macro level, we'd love to do that. We've obviously been working with some businesses on specific materials that they are using, or sectors, for instance, and talking to the energy colleagues, oil and gas, deconstruction, looking at some of the equipment types that are coming off the North Sea, as well as working with the energy, renewable energy sector as well. So I think there is an opportunity there. And that again, through dialogue with the likes of yourself, what are the things that you think you really benefit, in terms of products and materials? Our analysis would really be interested to help, because if they're the ones that are causing a bit of angst, or the pinch points to further impact, then let's have a chat about them.
Okay, and by the way, the questions are coming in fast and furious, Ian. The audience are really engaged with this subject. So product as a service, for example, your lighting example or the jeans example, is generally seen as good solution for circular economy, and it retains knowledge and ownership of products recycling. Could we and you find a way to collect and share more examples like those?
Yeah, absolutely. And we're certainly working with the Scottish procurement team on that, to identify some other real life examples that possibly people are already doing, but also just to create a kind of list of those opportunities. And absolutely, I mean, this is it. I mean, that's why I said about the pilots. I mean, in my past experience in a number of these initiatives, it's always been let's pilot something, let's try it, rather than kind of talk about it. Let's go on and see if there was examples, and there might be specific examples to a particular location. They might, just somebody might want to try something different, with a supplier who's local to them. But yeah, let's build up the case studies and get people a little bit more confident that there is a different way of doing it. So yeah, no, absolutely.
Okay, and on a completely different perspective from Joel Evans, how does tax rebalancing fit into the transition to a more circular economy?
Again, yeah, quite an interesting conversation, and that is something. I mean, I think there's obviously a conversation about what are the other enablers to the circular economy, and I mentioned procurement, but basically, yeah, there's clearly fiscal instruments could be used, and tax is obviously clearly one of them. I mean, obviously we are, I wouldn't say discussing with the Scottish Government that, tax policy, that's kind of beyond my pay band, but there are other things to incentivise the shift for both individual companies and even the public sector to think differently about it, that need to be considered. So yeah, we've seen that in other, certainly in other parts of Europe, people beginning to think about even VAT rates, change VAT rates for reuse and repair. Clearly, that would help. So there's some new thinking, and I guess that's part of the discussion now, is really to almost climb out of the box, the proverbial box, and think, what are the other things that we could be doing differently? And I'm always a great believer in learning from others. So the renewable the renewable industry has benefited greatly from subsidies in the past, and really now it's far more cheaper to provide renewable energy than fossil fuel energy. So there's lots of examples where you think, well, what made that happen at pace? What were the key lessons that we could learn, and could we apply that to our circular economy ambition? So if there was things that the procurement fraternity saw, that have really helped them, in other aspects of procurement for social or environmental value, then, I'm all ears.
Okay, thanks, Ian. I'll just keep going through these if
Yep.
that's okay. And you're doing really well, Ian. You've got the job, Ian. I'm giving you a grilling today. So from Stuart Calderwood, beyond procurement, should we start thinking about our trash as potential treasure, not just as a commercial opportunity, but in terms of potentially a very significant contribution to the net zero agenda?
Yeah, absolutely. No, it is. It's not trash is trash. I mean, it's just basically all materials mixed up in your bin. I mean, and that's it. And they've all got value. Some more than others, but the possibility of doing something with them locally and nationally is huge. But they all contribute to climate change. I mean, food waste is the one that we sometimes overlook. We produce so much food waste, globally, and certainly in Scotland as well. Costs us about £1 billion a year in food waste. But food waste itself, in terms of climate change, is 3 times, household food waste is 3 times more impactful than plastics. Now, plastics is the thing everybody knows about, the impact of it on the marine environment. People talk about it in terms of, we need to reduce it. Of course, we need to reduce it, but food waste at home is 3 times is impactful, and that's we just need to think of it differently.
Okay. I was just, while you were speaking there, I was thinking about, I used to engage regularly with the chief exec of a big waste supplier in Renfrewshire, and he used to say, where there's muck, there's brass.
Yes.
And
Yes.
his whole company had been, his gran had a wee kind of, I suppose you'd have called it rag and bone back in the day, and they'd built up to this massive company. And he talked about that whole thing about the circular economy. He didn't describe it as that. It was a while ago, but it just resonated there when you were speaking. You've got one last question. You'll be glad to hear, Ian, from Les Robertson. How do we enhance the private sector to do the same? So I suppose that's like, it's all very well us building stuff into our contracts, documentation and so on, but if the capability isn't in the private sector to deliver, how do we support that?
It's a good question. So I think the private sector is on this journey. I mean, certainly the big corporates are definitely on this journey, and they are, investigating, or certainly behind the scenes looking at the supply chains for all the things I said. People, the consumer, we as consumers are now, we're asking those questions. What is the supply chain? Where's your materials coming from? What's the impact? Not just on things like child labour and slavery, but where's it coming from? Indonesia, orangutans. Everybody's now much more conscious of that. So they're beginning to ask those questions. So, and I think, the businesses we work with, SMEs, they are very much interested in this. They know that this is the direction of travel. Okay, some of them, it probably does come down to capability or capacity within their businesses to address this. But there is a journey that they're all on, and I guess my organisation is one that supports these businesses. But they are looking for the signal, and I keep saying this: the signal, if the public procurement started to really ask those questions, it doesn't have to be legislation next week, but if you started to ask those questions of the companies, both the big corporates and the SMEs, what are you doing in this space? Where does this material come from? Are you thinking about it? That's what they're listening to. Like, how serious is government on all its levels really about this? And if they can start to see, at all levels, people are asking those questions, they'll, hopefully they'll come to us, because we can support them, we can provide them kits and that. But we're at this sweet spot where everybody's kind of saying, well, there's something happening here. How serious is this really going to be? Now, clearly at the moment we've got a pandemic, and that is the focal point. And I know there's loads of individual businesses and sectors still, looking to recover from this. So, but we are, in terms of climate change, at a real sweet spot. People are thinking, like, how really serious is this going to be in certainly in the short term, or can
Yeah.
I put this off until 2040?
Yeah, I know.
Stuff like that. So I think the message for me in terms of public procurement, go out there, start talking to your suppliers, bring this in at the top of the agenda. This is something we're absolutely serious about. What are you doing about it? What are you doing? Where's your supply coming from? Where's your materials? What are you doing about climate change? What strategies have you got in place? Because, this is something we're really serious about. And I think that will really, really push
Right.
the
Yeah.
people who are hesitant or still sitting on the fence, perhaps, or just thinking about this. It will
Mhm.
push them further, to do the thing.
Would you be happy to take, I know we're kind of just out of time. We've got one final question,
Yep.
if that's all
Yep.
right.
Yep.
So it's a follow-on from Veronica's earlier question in relation to case studies. And what she's saying is, in terms of potential new case studies, can Zeroway Scotland directly engage with the public sector to undertake a survey on perhaps the top 10 items that aren't already covered by the carbon metric, EPR, or proposed bans? Because what she's suggesting is that if we do that, we could then follow it through to technical and commercial evaluation, and we'd have a good public procurement blueprint for us to all work from. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, no, I'd love to do that, and it's a conversation we have had with Scottish Government colleagues. So we'd like to do that. We'd like to do. I mean, obviously, we would think about we'd come across what are the 10 biggest impact products in terms of climate change, but then it's also to cut that with what are the 10 most
Yeah,
the ones that you buy the most of to some extent, and then
yeah,
also thinking of through the lens of the economy of Scotland. What are the ones that actually have a supply chain in Scotland, or manufactured, or could be reprocessed or remanufactured here in Scotland? So actually look at it from the three lenses, not just the big carbon impact, but then you could have, the best bang for your buck. If we started to go down that road, we could create, great carbon benefits, great economic benefits for us here in Scotland, and possibly create some, new jobs in the back of that around remanufacturing and repurposing. So absolutely love to do that. And I think, having your help, yourself, Julie, and the team to look at that would be really great. Yeah, up for that.
fantastic. Ian, so I would really like to thank you for joining us. Clearly, you're very passionate about your subject, as are our attendees today. I think that's the most questions we've had so far. So we really appreciate you taking the time. Thanks
No worries.
again.